It's Thursday, May 30th, 2024, and welcome to Morning Gen, a daily show offering fresh takes on legal and political news over coffee, Monday through Friday. We have a lot to talk about today. Our two top stories are, first, Justice Alito's refusal to recuse himself from Supreme Court cases involving the insurrection or Donald Trump in light of the Flaggate incidents involving his home in Virginia and summer home in New Jersey. Our second top story is updates on what happened yesterday at the very first criminal trial against Donald Trump, specifically what the jury has been up to. But before we get to that legal news, we first need to do what we do, which is to make a stop off in Crazy Town. Today's Crazy Town location is Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea. And you may have missed this story, and that's why I want to highlight it for you. I saw it in the Wall Street Journal. And what happened in Korea this week, and I mean now South Korea, is that balloons came wafting from the north into South Korea, over 100 miles from the border, carrying what appeared to be, when the balloons came, landed in fields and near people's homes, landed in what had been tied to the balloon was bags of garbage as well as excrement. The headline is unbelievable. Kim Jong-un's balloon barrage, bags of excrement fly into the South. So this was trash and excrement, 260 balloons. So there's two things about this story. There's what was the motivation for Kim Jong-un to do this? And secondly, there was the justification and rather what I would call implausible incredulity, a lot of gaslighting from his sister, who is the mouthpiece for the North Korean dictator. So the reason, the motive for sending this trash into South Korea was in retaliation for some North Korean dissidents who were doing something similar, but instead of flying balloons upon which trash was hanging, they sent to the north across the border balloons holding leaflets about how the people might want to rise up against their dictator, as well as literature and news from the West. So in retaliation for that, you might call it a neighborly dispute. The North Korean dictator flew excrement into the South. Okay, so that's what happened. But again, there was this gaslighting piece of it. And Kim Jong-un's sister had this to say. She was apparently baffled over the South Koreans who were objecting to this garbage landing near their homes and on their lawns. And she suggested that instead of being angered by what was flying in the air, they should consider these balloons and what was flying below them as sincere presents. I kid you not. That was what she said. And I'm quoting now a translation, which is, I cannot understand why they are making a fuss as if they were hit by a shower of bullets. So what that story reminded me of was another instance, not in North and South Korea, but in Virginia, right near Washington, D.C., where Justice Alito resides with his lovely and what he calls independent wife. I think you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something I refer to as Flaggate, and more specifically, I am referring to, and I have it right here, the letter that Justice Alito sent to two senators, Richard Durbin and Sheldon Whitehouse. And he sent this letter to them, not because they wrote him a letter. No. These senators wrote a letter to Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice, asking Roberts to require Justice Alito to recuse himself from the cases that I mentioned because of a appearance of impropriety. And apparently the Chief Justice passed this complaint, this request, directly onto Alito. And Alito went through in his letter in 3 pages an analysis of why he determined that he is required not to recuse himself. And this is a fancy bit of gaslighting, which has some similarities to the language that was offered up by the sister, the spokesperson for Kim Jong-un, saying that people should just treat flying excrement like it was a gift. Justice Alito wants us to treat these flags flying, in particular the one flying right at his home in Virginia, an upside-down flag associated with the insurrection on the U.S. Capitol, associated with Donald Trump's refusal to follow the long-standing tradition of a peaceful transfer of power. This upside-down American flag, an anti-patriotic gesture supporting the attempted violent overthrow of the government. Justice Alito wants us to treat that like it's a gift. You see this in the language of his letter. He describes his wife as just someone who likes or is, as he wrote, fond of flags. What is the most ridiculous part of this, what takes on that gaslighting, that implausible incredulity, the same kind of thing we saw out of North Korea, was this. Justice Alito wrote that, and I will quote, "As I have stated publicly, I had nothing whatsoever to do with the flying of that flag. I was not even aware of the upside-down flag until it was called to my attention. As soon as I saw it, I asked my wife to take it down, but for several days she refused." Then he goes on, "My wife and I own our Virginia home jointly. She therefore has the legal right to use the property as she sees fit, and there were no additional steps." You heard that. "And there were no additional steps that I could have taken to have the flag taken down more promptly." Really? No additional steps? Do you have legs and working hands? Because I know that most people know how to walk over to a flagpole and use the pulley and take down the flag, right? Even if I were not physically able to do that, I would know how to ask someone to do that. And I find it implausible that Justice Alito, upon seeing the upside-down flag, upon it being called to his attention, he was displeased by it. He asked his wife to take it down, and he expects us to believe that there was, again, steps he could take to remove it. What? His wife was going to sue him? Is he suggesting that he is in a dangerous relationship with her? This is just not plausible at all. And I will read this other part. "My wife is fond of flying flags. I am not." He also talks about his New Jersey home, where there was a flag, another flag that he wasn't aware of, at this time being up and there for quite a while, that his wife had up, called the Appeal to Heaven flag. And it is associated with the Stop the Steal movement, that phony movement that became part of the violent insurrection, falsely claiming that Joe Biden had not won the 2020 election. And what he did there is saying that he had nothing to do with it. This reminds me a lot of Donald Trump saying he had nothing to do with it. He had no idea what his lawyer was doing. This is just absolutely not plausible. It is frustrating because he also repeatedly takes on the language of what appears to be faux feminism, saying his wife is an independent person, she can do what she wants. Meanwhile, this is the same man who authored the opinion based on the putting people on the Supreme Court who lied at their confirmation hearings, were able to overturn Roe versus Wade and take away all women's, not, his wife may be able to fly her flags how she chooses, but the rest of us have no bodily autonomy. No one else's wives, no one else's daughters, no one else's bodies themselves. So it is a bunch of gaslighting. And the last thing I'll say about this is that he wrote this. A reasonable person who is not motivated by political or ideological considerations or desire to affect the outcome of the Supreme Court cases would conclude that this event does not meet the applicable standard for recusal. I'm therefore duty-bound to reject your recusal request. Oh, come on. Yes, I know the standard for deciding whether you should recuse is you're supposed to put yourself in the shoes of a reasonable person and what would they think. So what he's saying is all of us, these senators, you, me, anyone else who thinks this smells bad, we're not reasonable people. We are either irrational or we're biased. Okay. And he's also saying that he's duty-bound to reject the recusal request. Well, let me just back up. What would happen if, and out of an abundance of caution, Justice Alito decided to recuse himself and it wasn't necessary? Or any justice in a situation where they were overly cautious and decided not to sit and be part of the ultimate opinion or not sign on to it. How many times do you think in American history a Chief Justice or Congress has criticized a member of the Supreme Court for being overly cautious and recusing themselves? I'll wait for the number. I'm pretty sure that number is zero, zilch, never. And that brings us to the main story of the day, where after which we will wrap up. That is what in the world happened yesterday at the last day of the judge giving the last day of the trial, when things transitioned from the jury being in the jury box, hearing all the aspects of the case and the instructions, transition to the jury beginning deliberations. That happened around 11:30 yesterday. And the jury deliberated from 11:30 all the way until around 4 o'clock. And I'd like to tell you what happened and what we can expect Thursday and Friday. The key thing that happened today was that the jury on 2 occasions asked to speak to the judge and to come back into the courtroom. And the things that they wanted, the two things, the first thing that the jury wanted is to have certain pieces of the trial testimony read back to them. And the parts that they asked to hear about can tell us a lot about where their mindset is. The second thing that the jury asked for was to have the jury instructions read back to them. So now this is important for me to make this distinction because I don't think I've always made this clear. The jury instructions that the judge gives are done orally. It's a guide to what the law is. In New York, the jury doesn't have that in hand in the jury room. Instead, all they have is what's known as the verdict form. That is a slimmed down version, is how I would call it, of the jury instructions. And the form, the verdict form, will have crime by crime, all 34, where they have to decide guilty or not guilty, and so on. And they'll bring that verdict form in when they're done deliberating, if they can come to a unanimous decision. If they can't come to a unanimous decision, that would result in a hung jury. Okay. So what the jury wanted to have read back to them from the trial transcript was testimony that relates directly to determining whether Donald Trump was part of a conspiracy to interfere in the 2016 election. Why is this important? This is important because remember that for each of these counts alleging that Donald Trump violated the business records law, there are 3 layers, and this is the deepest layer. So at the top layer is the question of whether Donald Trump had an intent to defraud when he caused or actually made false business records. And the attempt to defraud could be to defraud anyone. It could be to defraud the public. It could be to defraud, lenders if it were a bank situation and so on. Did he have an attempt to defraud when he caused or made false business records? And the next layer of this, to make it a felony, would be, did that intent to defraud somebody include an intent to violate another law? Okay, that's the second layer. And when the jury got their instructions, that other law, the judge said, was this New York law that talks about unlawfully trying to help someone or hurt someone in an election. Okay, now we get to the next layer. The judge said, what does that unlawfully mean? And one of the unlawful objectives would be to, interfere in the election. So I'm trying to keep it simple, the conspiracy to do that. So that's as simple as I can make it. So by the fact that the jury was asking questions, asking you to hear testimony about specific meetings right before Donald Trump launched his campaign in 2015 with David Pecker of the National Enquirer and with Michael Cohen, things like that they were asking about. I am not surprised at all. As I have said before and will say repeatedly, one of the most difficult things to understand and to prove beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury when it comes to a crime that is not like robbing a store or something that's a street crime or fraud where people can kind of assume if you run out of a Best Buy with a TV on your shoulder and the alarm is ringing, most people can assume that you intended to steal it as opposed to you're just taking it outside to see what the glare was from the parking lot. Unlike that kind of thing where we all have experience with it. Intent, not many of us have been involved in running for office, right? So when the jury is trying to hear this testimony, they're trying to get their mind around whether Donald Trump knew about the Stormy Daniels payment and whether it was part of a larger conspiracy to hide bad stories, catch and kill conspiracy to make sure the public didn't have this information. And the fact that they're asking about this meeting where David Pecker of the National Enquirer said he'd be eyes and ears of the campaign and they were going to kill stories. And they asked also to hear testimony about the Karen McDougal situation. Bottom line is the jury is doing their job, and this looks terrible for Donald Trump. It's too soon to say one way or another. I really do think the jury will come back with a verdict Friday. It's possible they'll come back with one today, but I think that's too soon. I think they're still getting their mind around what the law is, and I would expect we should hear something Friday, probably before lunch. Thanks so much.